Hi, it's Vera. Welcome to episode 11 of the PL Pod. Today, I am happy to welcome Roger Nash to the podcast. Roger is inaugural Poet Laureate of the City of Greater Sudbury and a past president of the League of Canadian Poets. Literary awards include the Canadian Jewish Book Award for Poetry, the Penn O. Henry Prize Story Award, and being anthologized in Best Canadian Poetry, Biblioasis 2020. His latest collection of poetry is Climbing a Question with Quattro Publishing in 2019. Let's just jump right in. You're an experienced poet and you have had your work published by, publishing houses, but do you still have a list of poetry journals you like to submit to regularly?
As people say in the media, that's an interesting question, but I don't know why you're asking it. I wear red socks when I'm writing, and I keep lists of things. But when I started out submitting, I was in my 40s. I was a late starter. I'd been writing before that, but shy to send. So when I started off submitting, I got advice from other poets and made little lists of journals, magazines to send to. But at this stage, I do bookkeeping, and what I keep lists or written records of is my submissions, where they're out at the moment, who they're with, what journals, what magazines, whether they've been accepted or rejected. If they're rejected, then I send them out again. And the good journals are in my head. I don't have a list anymore. And anyway, you'd have to keep on adding to it because new journals, new websites emerge, and you find places you've submitted to before and even got to know editors and so on, their tastes change, or they want to try new audiences. So you sort of keep up with that, and it seemed to me pointless to keep lists I was forever changing. But I do keep these records. If you write a lot and quickly when you write, as I know you do, Vera, and so do I, you may have 10, 15, 20 submissions out at a given time, and my head is, I got a small head, a small mind. I can't remember them. So I keep bookwork records of what submissions are out where and resubmit when they're rejected.
Well, and I think good record keeping is really important because you cannot, what an embarrassing moment it is to resubmit a poem and then have it accepted in more than one place and having to explain your faux pas. So, and I have done that. And luckily it was graciously fixed.
Yeah, well, that's one reason why I keep the records. I don't like doing multiple submissions. It seems unfair to editors and readers who are often doing the work on a fairly voluntary basis, and then they go and accept something by you, and if you've got it out somewhere else, accepted somewhere else, it's a sheer waste of their time. So I keep good records so I'm not into multiple submissions.
Well, having learned my lesson the hard way that one time, I keep good records. When you're writing, do you work on a theme when you're building a collection, or do you just write until you feel you have sort of a friendly collection of work to support itself or support each other?
Yeah, well, different poets write in different ways. There's no one right way to write. So anybody with time enough to waste to watch this blog now, you don't have to agree with my way of doing things or Vera's way of doing things. You find your own way. And my way is generally, I feel as though I'm a kind of witness to what is happening around me or sometimes in me. And you can never predict what the news is going to bring or what is happening around you in town or down your street or what's going on inside you. So I don't write to a theme, but I write out of an urgency to be a poetic witness, to celebrate or maybe mourn what is happening around me. But eventually, I may look back at what I've written and find I could cluster some of these poems together as dealing with the same kind of theme. Not that I wrote them intentionally on that theme at the time, but they cluster well together.
Yes. Well, I agree with you. I think, well, I'm a haiku poet, so, nature is my forte.
Yes.
And so they do kind of connect in that way. And I agree with you. It is interesting when they all kind of fall together and you see, oh, you've made a thread here that really makes sense. And it will make sense to everyone when it's out there. So yeah, that's good. Do you ever write a poem? I mean, I know you're experienced, but do you ever write a poem that you feel doesn't hit its mark? And then what do? Do you bin it, or do you just put it aside and go back to the drawing board later on it?
You asked, do I ever feel I've written a poem that's not hit the mark? Yes, every poem I write, I feel has not written the mark. I may be excited with it initially, or at some point, but then I get doubts and I try to revise, or sometimes I find revisions are making it worse, not better. So yes, I often feel a poem has not hit the mark, but with some of them, eventually I feel maybe I'm too down on it. I will submit it or put it in a manuscript. But yeah, an important thing we learn as writers is to revise and revise. There's more revising you do in time than the actual writing. And the revisions may sometimes be quite small typographically, like you change a comma, and it makes all the difference sometimes. A little change typographically can be a big change in the meaning and the power of a poem.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with you there. I mean, it's the Oxford comma argument for poetry, isn't it? Do you ever feel like your intention, well, okay, maybe intention is the wrong word, but you start out with a poem that you have composed, and then in the editing phase, you've changed the entire concept of the poem? Like
that? Yes, that can happen. And I may keep some things, important images, but I've put them to a different purpose than I thought they were originally going to serve.
I see what you're saying, because I think we all have an idea of what we're trying to say when we sit down, because we're obviously moved by something to write a poem. As you said, it could be a neighborhood thing, could be a world issue, could be anything. And at the end of it, you just hope that you have, I don't know if offered solace is the right word, or maybe awareness of what it is you're trying to say in relation to the topic you're trying to cover.
Yes, yeah. Well, I think often we don't know what we're trying to say until we've said it. So sometimes it's a bad start to a poem to be too sure of what it is you need to say or bear witness to, because that may change during the writing. And we have to have that sort of openness during the process.
Right. You're not telling a story. You're exploring the issue really in poetry and offering the what is happening as it's happening, or, as it relates to today.
Yes.
And that being said, those poems written to relate to today often stand up over the test of time for, obviously decades and centuries. So it's a gift to be a poet, to be someone who records these things. Is that how you feel, or?
Yeah, I feel I'm part of history. I like to read poets from the past, the distant past even, to learn from them. Sometimes I have to learn some of the bits of different dialect they use there and different spellings. I read poets of today too, and I hope that my better poems will be read into the future too. So you try to phrase things in a way that could find a new, a different life in future times. and not tie things too concretely to the here and now, my red socks and the street I live in.
Mm-hmm. Well, because you may change streets.
And I might change socks.
Well, let's hope. I mean, you can't wear the red ones every day. What do you see as your, I'm going to say, poetic crowning glory here in your life to date as a poet?
I don't really work with the image of crowning glory in my life, but there are things I'm proud of. Thinking about it, recently, one of the things I felt very, very proud of is when I think of or meet up with past Poet Laureates of Sudbury, 6 so far at this present date. And I feel really proud because I was lucky enough to be the inaugural, the first Poet Laureate. And I feel I'm part of a community of writers, and I've had my little part in helping shape it and being shaped by it. And seeing 6 so well-developed, experienced, alert Poet Laureates in Sudbury, I feel really proud to be part of that. Not that I've created it, but I've had a hand in it.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's face it, Roger. I mean, your start in this Poet Laureate situation is what has allowed the rest of us to follow. And your Terra North e-zine is something that we all support and add to through our terms. So I think that is that's a really good community to be part of, and thank you for starting it, because otherwise we'd just be floundering poets in the North.
Yeah, but you said at the very beginning what awards I'd won, and conventionally people would say, well, I'm proud of the awards I've won. And yeah, I'm proud for my poems that won those awards, that they won them. But there's a downside to thinking too much of awards you can win, or applause you can gain from bigger and bigger crowds of people, because you can begin to be writing for the awards rather than writing to say something that you're burning to say, that you've got to testify to. And some poets do write for awards, and you can tell it from the way they write. And they're not saying so much. They're writing, their voice is being killed by their desire for fame. And when I won the Penn O. Henry Book Award, I had to go down to New York. I think the one and only time I've been there to win an award. You have to go there to receive it. And I was besieged by people during the ceremony who wanted my autograph. And after the ceremony, I went outside in the streets to walk the night, and I was still being besieged by people coming out of corners. And I thought, to heck with this. I want to get back to the quiet of Sudbury when I can have ideas to write about. I don't want to be besieged.
But isn't it interesting?
A downside to awards.
Well, I would say there is a downside to celebrity of any sort. And you're right about poetry being one of them, because as poets, I think we need that quiet state, the unrecognized state, because it's what drives us really drives us is the wrong word, but allows us to write those quiet things that have such impact. But I don't know. One day of celebrity is not bad.
Well, yeah, keep it to that day, though.
Yeah. I can't imagine being besieged, quite frankly, but,
You're only as good as a poet with the most recent poem you're working on now. I think that's a good mentality.
Yeah, I would agree with you.
You've got to get this current poem right. Never mind awards you've got in the past. If you're still a practicing poet, it's this poem you're writing now that you've got to get up to scratch. Like building a cabinet, get all the joints right.
Yep, because you're only as good as your last thing, and that thing won't last, really. It was last year's award, and there will be a new award, and someone else will win it. Well, hopefully someone will win it that might be you again, but, repeating Well, I think a lot of awards are only given to one person, and then you have to take a lapse, in your submission area so that you don't bombard them with work every year and monopolize the award. What's next for you?
Well, I've just covered it really. Working on with the poem I'm trying to write at the moment, seeing whether it changes ideas and form during the process, perhaps being teed off with it in the end and putting it aside. If I'm teed off with something for a long time, I don't keep at it. It's too frustrating. I put it aside and in a bottom drawer and come back to it in a few months' time or even years' time and see if I have new ideas, new drive to write it. And sometimes that happens. I may keep some of the what I think powerful imagery in it, but the poem gets changed.
Well, and that happens with time, right? I mean,
so
if you're putting it aside.
Yeah, keep a bottom drawer to put some of your writing in and come back to it with fresh eyes. And don't get obsessive about getting it right now, because now may not be the right time to finish it.
That's right. What advice would you give to budding poets?
Bud. Keep budding, Bud. Is your name Bud?
Okay, Bud might be a multi-purpose word in these times of pot shops, but yeah. Well, I agree with what you're saying.
It's hard to give a bit of advice impersonally, because I don't know who I'm talking to. I would try and address it to the particular person, knowing what interests them and whatever difficulties they have with writing or life. But a general bit of advice would be don't sit down to write in order to write another poem or story. Sit down to write because you feel you may have something to say. Sit down to write when you have a broodiness with words, perhaps a broodiness with what's happening around you in life or inside you. But don't get obsessive. I must sit down to write because I've been told I should write something every day. So here I am with a blank sheet of paper and I've got to write. But, oh dear, I've got nothing to say. So you fail, of course, and get depressed about that. So wait until you feel driven, asked by the muses, driven by the muses to try something.
Yes, I would say so. I mean, otherwise you're just writing words down on a page.
Yeah.
And there's no emotion in that.
Yeah, and that can happen, especially if you like to count the number of poems you've written this year or this month or in this life. And some people, if they talk to you about their writing, they say, oh, I've written 133 poems. So you're pretty sure they're going to sit down tomorrow morning and write the 134th, because it's the number of poems that they're writing which makes them feel important, makes them feel they're succeeding. But this isn't like money in the bank where you could say, well, I'm succeeding as a millionaire. I've got more millionaires' dollars in the bank. You succeed as a poet when you're writing good poems that say something that you had to say.
That's right.
So don't bother to count them. Don't get obsessed with counting them anyway.
That's interesting, because I don't know if you know this, but my brother-in-law was Ukrainian, and he taught me how to make pierogi. And he told me, don't count them when you're making them because they'll blow up in the water. And it's kind of the same thing with poetry. Yeah. If you are concentrating on numbers and not quality, it's not going to work out well.
Yeah, yes.
That's good advice. Would you like to finish with a poem? Because we have now covered the entire span of the podcast.
Well, we're fast workers, aren't we?
We are. Well, I think the conversation was interesting and time just went by quickly.
It did too. Well, I have a poem I'd like to try on this invisible audience. I quite often like to write. What's happened here?
Nothing's happened. I can still see you.
Oh, I can't see anything. I can't see you, but I'll get out of here. Well, I'll just read it anyway.
Yes, go ahead.
I like to keep up with changing times and say something worth saying and that will be longer lasting about them. So I wrote an ode to a rain stick. I have a rain stick from Chile. So here's my ode to a rain stick. My Chilean rain stick rattles, not trickles with sound. Downpours of grit play bright scales down bleached bones in the Atacama Desert, as arid as deserts come. Inside the dry tube of Capitado cactus, a jiggling scrape against spikes, a click, knock, tap, clap, comes to a cascade of stop. Upend the stick repeatedly, now this way, now that, and down pours, wrap, back to the ends where they started. Fall in order to rise, rise in order to fall. Rain sticks come down to us from pre-Mayan times for their success in healing our deserts, or for coaching us constantly in the long, tilting tunnels of each century. When we fall into jumps, we must vault into dives, upending our days again and again to keep the percussive music of our lives. And if I were reading that in front of an audience, I'd probably have my rain stick with me as a visual accompaniment and play it as I read along.
Well, that is why you are who you are, Roger, and I appreciate your coming here today. Thank you all for listening, podcast audience. And you know what I always say? Write something. It feels good.